Jesse Hardin stood on the platform at Bluebonnet Station on a bright April morning in 1881 with a fistful of bluebonnets going soft in his fist, and he was about to meet a woman who was not the one he thought he was meeting. He had picked the flowers himself that morning at first light, because the town was named for them, and he thought a bride from Philadelphia might like the joke. He had on his one good coat. He had practiced her name under his breath the whole ride into town. Eleanor Prescott, until it stopped sounding like a stranger's name and started sounding like something that belonged to him. The train came in loud and slow hissing steam across the platform, and Jesse Hardin watched every window like a man watching for weather. A woman stepped down from the second car. She was not dressed for a wedding. She wore a split canvas riding skirt gone pale at the knees, a man's wool coat 2 sizes too large, and gloves worn through at the first knuckle. A coiled lariat hung from the strap of her travel bag the way another woman might carry a parasol. She had the look of someone who had ridden more miles than she had walked in her whole life. Jesse stepped forward anyway, flowers first, Hope doing most of the thinking for him. "Miss Prescott." The woman stopped him with one raised hand before he got any closer. The same gesture you would use to stop a runaway calf. "You bought the wrong bride," she said. 3 words, strong enough to fold flowers. Jesse Hardin stood there on the platform of his own town in front of half the people he had grown up with, holding a fistful of bluebonnets for a woman who apparently did not exist anymore. And here is the part nobody in Bluebonnet expected. Least of all, the woman standing in front of him. He smiled. He smiled and lowered the flowers and held out his hand to shake instead. "Then I'm glad to meet whoever you are," he said, "because you rode a long way to tell a stranger bad news in person, and that is not a small thing." Most men told at a train platform that their promised bride was gone would have reddened or raged or turned on their heel. Jesse Hardin held out his hand. To understand why, you need to know what he already knew standing on that platform, and what he did not know yet about the woman in front of him. Both matter. Stay for both. Her name was Sadie McCrae, and she had not come to marry anyone. 3 days earlier, Sadie McCrae had been minding her own business entirely, which was cattle, not correspondence. She was 24 Texas-born, and had spent the last 5 years moving stock north along the rail lines for her father's outfit, a job that suited her better than any parlor ever had. That week she was escorting 40 head to a buyer outside Bluebonnet, riding the same westbound train 2 cars up from a connection in Cheyenne. Minding 40 head of cattle and her own ledger and nobody else's. Romance. Eleanor Prescott was minding a great deal of romance, all of it going badly. Eleanor had answered Jesse Hardin's matrimonial notice from a parlor in Philadelphia 6 months before, charmed by a description of open sky and good grazing that she had pictured wrongly as something closer to a large park. She had corresponded pleasantly through the winter. She had packed a trunk of dresses unsuited to every task a ranch would ever ask of her, and somewhere around Cheyenne, watching the trees thin out and the land go flat and enormous and utterly without a single familiar landmark in any direction, Eleanor Prescott had come to understand all at once and completely that she had made a catastrophic mistake. She would not get off the train. She sat rigid in her seat as it slowed into Bluebonnet, staring straight ahead, while the conductor pleaded and her trunk sat useless on the platform. She was by her own tearful account afterward to anyone who would listen, not brave enough to face the man she had written 100 letters to and simply say no in person. What she was brave enough to do was grab the sleeve of the nearest capable-looking woman in the car, which happened to be Sadie McCrae, returning from checking on her cattle in the stock car, and beg her with real desperation to carry a folded letter out to whoever was waiting and explain, because she, Eleanor, could not bear to see his face when he heard it. Sadie McCrae had exactly no reason in the world to say yes to this. She had cattle to sell, a train to catch onward, and no acquaintance whatsoever with the disappointed rancher of Bluebonnet, Wyoming territory. She said yes anyway, for a reason she could not entirely explain to herself later, beyond the plain fact that somebody had to. And the somebody standing at the door happened to be her. She had meant to hand him the letter and walk away inside 2 minutes. That is not, in the end, how the 2 minutes went. "There is a letter," Sadie said once his hand had come back down from the shake he had offered, and neither of them had quite let go of the moment. She held it out. "She asked me to give you this instead of saying it herself. I read enough of it on the way over to save you some of it, if you'd rather hear it plain than read it dressed up." "Plain then," Jessie said. "She's not coming." She got as far as looking at Wyoming out a train window and decided Wyoming was a great deal more Wyoming than she had pictured. "She's sorry. She means it, I think. She's not a bad woman. She's just the wrong woman for this particular piece of ground. And she worked that out about 400 miles too late to say so kindly in a letter. So she said it kindly through me instead." Jesse Hardin looked down at the unopened letter in his hand for a long moment, and something crossed his face that was not quite grief and not quite relief, and landed somewhere honest in between. "I'm obliged to you," he said finally. "Riding herd on your own cattle and somebody else's heartbreak in the same week seems like a poor bargain for you." "Wasn't much of a bargain," Sadie agreed. "Wasn't going to let a man stand on a platform with flowers and find out the hard way either. Some things a person ought to hear from a person, even if it's the wrong person telling it." She turned to go. She had a buyer waiting, and 40 head of cattle drawing feed money out of her pocket every hour they sat idle in the stock pens, and this errand kindly done was finished. Jesse Hardin said the thing that kept her standing on that platform a while longer than either of them planned. "Miss McCrae, before you go, I don't suppose you'd know a rancher hereabouts, needing an extra hand for 30 days? I find myself in considerably more trouble than a missing bride, and it happens to be the kind of trouble a person who rides better than she talks might actually be useful for." Sadie McCrae looked at him properly for the first time, past the flowers and the coat and the plain disappointment still settling into his shoulders, and something in the shape of his question caught her interest, the way a strange brand catches a cattlewoman's eye. 30 days for what, she said? "For keeping a ranch that isn't mine to keep unless I'm married by my 29th birthday, Jesse said. "Which is the 20th of May, which is 28 days from this morning." The trouble, once Jesse Hardin laid it out over coffee at the Bluebonnet Hotel, was not romance at all. It was paper. And paper is often the meaner enemy. His father, Thaddeus Hardin, had built the Broken Spur out of 9,000 acres of good grass and 20 years of stubbornness, and had died the previous autumn, leaving a will that was, by the account of every lawyer who read it, a document written by a proud man, determined to control his son from beyond the grave. The Broken Spur would pass whole and clear to Jesse, the will said, provided Jesse was a married man keeping a household by his 29th birthday. Failing that condition, the ranch would pass in equal half to his cousin Cyrus Hardin, a man who had never in his life pulled a calf or mended a fence, but who had for the past 6 months been in quiet and frequent correspondence with a land agent for the Union Pacific Railroad. "My father thought a wife would settle me," Jesse said. "Mostly, I think he was afraid of exactly what's happening now. Cyrus wants to sell his half the day the clock runs out. Railroad or cattle syndicate or whoever pays first. And once outside, money owns half the Broken Spur. The whole of it goes mine included, inside 2 years. I've watched it happen to 3 ranches already in this county. I don't intend it happening to a 4th. "So you advertised for a wife," Sadie said. "Like buying seed corn out of a catalog." "I'm not proud of the method," Jesse admitted. "I am, however, 28 days from losing the only thing my father ever built, and pride is a luxury item I find myself short on this particular spring." Sadie sat with her coffee going cold and turned the whole shape of it over in her mind the way she'd turn over a horse before buying, checking the legs and the teeth and the temperament all at once. "You're asking a stranger you met 40 minutes ago to marry you," she said. That's a bigger ask than a spare hand for 30 days. I'm asking a stranger I met 40 minutes ago to help me keep a ranch, Jesse said. How that help gets arranged, on paper or otherwise, is a conversation for later, and only if you're willing to have it at all. I've been engaged to a woman I never met for 6 months, and it came to exactly nothing. I'm not fool enough to think a wedding solves anything that isn't also true underneath it. But I've got 28 days and a lawyer who's a decent man doing an indecent job on my cousin's behalf, and I'd rather spend those days working with someone honest than waiting on someone who's already told me through a stranger and a folded letter that she doesn't want the life. It was Sadie. Thought possibly the strangest proposal ever delivered over lukewarm hotel coffee. And also uncomfortably one of the more honest conversations she had ever had with a man in her life. I've got a buyer waiting on 40 head, she said. I can give you 2 days while I settle that business. After that, I've got my father's outfit to answer to, and they're not expecting me to marry a Wyoming rancher on my way home from selling cattle. 2 days is a start, Jesse said. I've learned to work fast this spring. Whatever Sadie McCrae expected of the broken spur, and she had pictured something threadbare and desperate to match a man reduced to mail-order matrimony, the reality surprised her. The house was sound, the fences tight, the herd fat on good spring grass, and the hands, 4 of them, all older men who had ridden for Thaddeus Hardin for a decade or more, watched Sadie's arrival with the particular wary courtesy of men waiting to see if a newcomer could actually work before they decided to like her. She settled that question by sundown of the first day, roping a lamed heifer out of a bog on the second try, and setting the leg herself better than the ranch's own foreman would have managed it. By supper, the 4 hands had stopped calling her ma'am with the careful edges on it, and started calling her ma'am, the way you'd say it to somebody who had earned the word. Jesse watched all of this with an expression Sadie caught twice and could not quite name. Not surprise exactly, something closer to recognition. The way you look at a tune you cannot place but know you have heard before. The 2 days stretched honestly and without much ceremony on either side into 4, then a week. There was real work to be done, and Sadie found herself doing it. Culling and branding and riding fence with a competence that made the 30-day arrangement feel less like charity and more like a partnership neither of them had quite named out loud yet. In the evenings, they sat on the porch with the lawyer's letters and the will's exact wording spread between them, plotting like 2 people solving a puzzle rather than 2 people falling into anything. And that Sadie noted privately was probably the safest way for it to happen if it was happening at all. Cyrus Hardin rode out on the 9th day to see for himself what his cousin was up to, and did not bother hiding his displeasure at finding a competent stranger running cattle instead of a heartbroken bachelor running out the clock. Word in town is your bride never arrived, Cyrus said, not dismounting. Looking Sadie over the way a man looks over a horse he intends to disqualify from a race on a technicality. And that whoever this is, she's some drover's daughter picked up off a train platform for the occasion. A judge is going to want to know this marriage is genuine, cousin not paper dressed up to beat a deadline. I'll be making certain, he asks. Ask away, Sadie said before Jesse could answer, in a voice that had settled 40 head of nervous cattle onto a rail car without raising once. I've branded more of this outfit's calves in 9 days than you've branded in your life, Mr. Hardin. You go ahead and tell your judge that a woman who can rope, doctor, and keep books isn't a genuine wife because she arrived on a stock train instead of a passenger coach. I expect he'll have opinions about which one of you understands what a ranch marriage actually is. Cyrus Hardin had no immediate answer for that, and rode off considerably less certain of his railroad money than he had arrived. Jesse watched her a long moment after the dust settled. You didn't have to fight that battle, he said. It's mine to fight. It's ours to fight, Sadie said, and then heard what she'd said and did not take it back. If I'm staying past 30 days, which I find I'm starting to consider, it was the first either of them had said the word ours out loud, and neither one made a show of it, and both of them noticed anyway. A letter caught up to Sadie on the 12th day, forwarded from the buyer's office in Bluebonnet, and it was not the kind of letter that made staying any simpler. It was from her father. He was glad to hear the cattle had sold well. He mentioned in the same unhurried hand he used for everything from branding schedules to bad news that Everett Coyle had come by the house twice that month asking after her, and that Everett Coyle ran a sound outfit 2 counties over, and that a man who asked after a woman twice in 1 month while she was 400 miles from home was a man worth a serious answer one way or the other. Her father did not tell her what to do. He never had. He simply laid the facts on the table the way he laid out a saddle before a long ride and let her decide what she was riding into. Sadie read the letter twice on the porch steps and then a 3rd time, and Jessie, coming out to check the evening stock, saw her face and had the good sense not to ask. She wrote back that night by lamplight and tore up 2 drafts before she let the 3rd one stand. She told her father the truth, because lying to him had never once worked in 24 years, and she saw no reason to start now. She told him about the wrong bride and the 30 days, and a rancher who had offered her honest work instead of a honeyed promise, and a ranch that felt God help her more like something worth fighting for with every day that passed. She told him Everett Coyle was a good man, and she was in no position to promise him anything because she did not currently know what she was promising herself. She did not mention the coat in the trunk because she did not know about the coat yet. That recognition was still 9 days off, waiting for her in a torn saddle blanket and a line of red thread. What she did write near the bottom of the page was this: "You always said a person ought to choose the harder, true thing over the easier maybe. I don't know yet if this is the true thing. I know it isn't the easy one, and for once in my life that isn't scaring me off it." Her father's answer came back 3 weeks later, short as always. He told Everett Coyle kindly that his daughter's heart appeared to be otherwise occupied. Everett, being a decent sort, wished her well and married a schoolteacher from Laramie within the year, which everyone agreed suited him better in the end. But that answer came later. In the meantime, Sadie folded her own letter and sat with the not knowing, which was its own kind of work, harder in some ways than any calf she had ever pulled. She had built her whole life on reading sign correctly, on knowing a lame horse from a lazy one, a genuine buyer from a time-waster at 50 paces. She had never once had to read her own heart the same way, and she found it considerably harder going than any trail she had ridden. She stayed anyway. Not because the deadline demanded it, though it did. Not because the ranch needed her, though it plainly did that too. She stayed because some mornings now, watching Jesse Hardin ride the fence line at first light, with the same patient thoroughness he brought to everything, she caught herself hoping the count of remaining days would move slower than it did. That she thought watching him from the porch with her father's letter still in her coat pocket was probably an answer in itself, whether she was ready to read it or not. Cyrus did not ride out again. He went to the county seat instead, which was worse. He filed a petition with Judge Silas Pruitt's court, not the family's own lawyer, but a circuit judge brought in special from Laramie, asking that any marriage completed in the final days before the deadline be examined for what he called, in careful lawyer's language, want of genuine intent. He had witnesses lined up. The station master, who would testify that the bride expected off the train had never arrived. The hotel clerk, who would testify that a different woman entirely had checked into a room that same afternoon. It was not an unreasonable petition, dressed up as it was in reasonable words, and that was exactly what made it dangerous. "He's not wrong about the facts," Jessie said, reading the filing at the kitchen table with a grimness Sadie had not seen on him before. "He's just wrong about what the facts mean. A judge who doesn't know either of us is going to read this and see exactly what Cyrus wants him to see. A rancher panicked by a deadline. A woman paid off a passing train." "Nobody's paying me anything," Sadie said. "I know that. You know that. A stranger reading a filing at a desk in Laramie doesn't know that." Jesse rubbed his eyes. "The hearing's set for the 18th, 2 days before the deadline. If Pruitt rules the marriage was arranged in bad faith, the whole condition fails whether we're married by the 20th or not, and Cyrus gets his half free and clear." Then we'd better give the judge something realer to look at than a filing full of facts arranged sideways, she said finally. Facts arranged honest usually beat facts arranged clever. I've seen it happen at cattle auctions more times than I can count. She did not say, because she had not fully admitted it to herself yet, that the facts had stopped feeling arranged at all somewhere around the 9th day, and had started feeling simply true. To understand what happened next, you have to go back 3 winters, to a blizzard that neither of them, until that week, knew they had shared. In the winter of 1878, Jesse Hardin had ridden with his father's outfit on a late drive up the Bozeman Trail, pushing 700 head north, against advice and against weather that had no business turning as fast as it did. The storm came down off the plains with almost no warning. A wall of white that swallowed the sun in the space of 20 minutes. And Jesse, chasing a break in the herd, got separated from the outfit and thrown when his horse went down in a drift he never saw. He lay in the snow long enough to stop feeling his hands, which every man on that trail knew was the last stop before stopping feeling everything else. What saved him was a stranger. A young cowgirl riding drag on a different outfit's herd a mile east saw a riderless horse circling and went looking on nothing but instinct and stubbornness. She found him half buried, cut a fire out of buffalo chips and sage with hands as cold as his, wrapped him in her own coat and blanket, and sat up through the worst of the night, keeping him talking so he would not slip under. By the gray hour before dawn, with the wind dropping, she had gotten him onto her own horse, walked him 3 miles to a line shack, built a second fire, and left before full light without ever giving her name, because she had 700 head of somebody else's cattle scattered across a blizzard and a job to finish. Jesse Hardin had spent 3 years trying to describe that night to people who had not been in it, and always failing. He remembered the coat most of all, an old canvas thing too big for her, mended at one shoulder, with a line of unmistakable red thread stitched in a pattern like small running birds. He remembered a voice that never once let fear into it, even when his own voice had started to. He did not remember a face clearly. The cold takes faces first and gives them back last. He had asked after her for a year at every ranch within 200 miles. Nobody claimed her. Eventually, he had stopped asking and folded the memory away, the way you fold away a coat too painful to wear and too important to give away, and gotten on with the business of living, until a woman stepped off a train in Bluebonnet claiming to be the wrong bride entirely. The recognition when it came was almost nothing at all. That is usually how the real ones arrive. 9 days before the hearing, mending a torn saddle blanket by lamplight on the porch, Sadie Farrow ran a needle through canvas in a small, quick pattern she had sewn 1,000 times without thinking about it. A line of stitches shaped, if you looked close, like a row of small, running birds. Jesse Hardin, sitting across the porch with the lawyer's papers forgotten in his lap, went very still. "Where did you learn that stitch?" he said in a voice that had changed register entirely. "My mother," Sadie said, not looking up. "She sewed that pattern into everything. Saddle blankets, coats my brother's shirts when they tore. Said a plain patch was an insult to good canvas." She glanced up, caught his face, and stopped. "Jesse, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said slowly. "I think something might finally be right, and I don't quite trust it yet." Winter of 78, the Bozeman Trail north of the Forks. The worst storm anybody on that drive had seen. Does any of that mean something to you? Sadie's hands went still on the needle. "There was a rider," she said. Quiet now, the whole shape of her attention changing. Thrown, half frozen, alone. "I never got his name. Didn't have time to ask it, and didn't much think I'd see him again to need it. I gave him my coat, the old canvas one, and walked him into a line shack, and left before light because I had cattle scattered from here to the Powder River near enough." She looked at him, properly searching now, adding years backward onto his face, the way you age a photograph in your mind. "That coat had my mother's stitching on the shoulder. I still have it," Jesse said. "I never could give it away. It's folded in a trunk in the house this very minute." Mark Twain, writing about his own years traveling that same wide country, once said that truth is stranger than fiction, because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities, and truth is under no such obligation at all. Jesse Hardin had read that line once in a newspaper and thought it clever. Sitting on his own porch, 9 days before a hearing that could cost him everything, looking at the woman who had once kept him alive in a storm, and then walked out of his life before dawn, without a name, he finally understood it as something closer to Scripture. "You saved my life, and never told me your name," he said. "And 3 years later I met you again, on a train platform, and you told me before anything else that I'd bought the wrong bride." He almost laughed, and it came out closer to something else. "Sadie McRae, I don't think you've ever once in your life been the wrong anything." The hearing on the 18th lasted 11 minutes, which is 11 minutes longer than it needed to, because Judge Silas Pruitt, a plain and unsentimental man by every account, was moved despite himself. Cyrus Hardin's lawyer laid out the timeline exactly as filed. A missing bride, a stranger off a stock train, a convenient marriage assembled inside a deadline. It was a tidy story, and it fell apart the moment Jesse Hardin stood up uninvited and told the judge about a blizzard in the winter of '78 and a coat with a mother's stitching folded in a trunk for 3 years, and asked the court plainly whether a marriage built on a debt 3 winters old and a rescue that asked for nothing in return sounded like fraud to him, or sounded like the single most genuine thing either party involved had ever done. Judge Pruitt asked Sadie McRae one question only. Did she love this man? Separate from any ranch, any deadline, any cousin's ambitions? "I loved the shape of him before I ever learned his name," Sadie said. "The ranch is just where I finally caught up to it." The petition was dismissed. Cyrus Hardin left the courthouse considerably poorer in prospects than he had entered it, and sold his eventual much-reduced settlement to a cattle syndicate 2 years later for far less than the railroad would once have paid. Small comfort, but arithmetic doesn't care about a man's pride. They married on the morning of the 20th, Jesse's 29th birthday, in the yard at the Broken Spur, with the 4 hands standing witness, and a circuit preacher who asked no questions he did not already know good answers to. Sadie wore her own canvas riding skirt, mended at one knee in a small pattern of running birds, because a woman does not stop being who saved her groom in a blizzard just because the wedding finally caught up to the rescue. The old coat still hangs in the hall at the Broken Spur, mended shoulder and all. Neither of them has ever seen a reason to put it away. If you enjoyed this ride, there are more stories waiting, complete from first hoofbeat to last, right here on the Wild West Embers. Come sit a while longer. The fire's not going anywhere.